Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest version of Tales from Outer Space, where I take an HFY story from somewhere around the internet and read it aloud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Like, subscribe, and all that YouTube comf to help this video and channel grow. Anyways, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I would just like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: FallenAngel, BuzzKillington, Datamagnet, and Bob the Dragon. Thank you again, and now on to the story. Chimeras, written by Petrified Lioness. For both humans and Durangos, cannibalism was such an instinctive taboo that it had rarely needed to be formally outlawed until the populations grew large enough to make 1 in a million an everyday occurrence. This wasn't to say that it never happened, but always there would be more in the practice than mere food. Some cults amongst both species used ritual consumption of the flesh of their own kind as a way of repudiating all moral constraints, proclaiming themselves to be above the law. Others perceived it as a way of keeping their loved ones close to them after death, or making their enemies' virtues their own. Most often, though, it was used as a way of depersonalizing enemies, of declaring them to be beasts rather than men. Where humans and Durangos differed was in how they ranked taboo against survival. Durangos insisted it was better to die than to break that particular taboo. Most humans held that death was an enemy to be fought tooth and nail, and so cannibalism, as a last-ditch alternative to starvation, though still shameful, was not a sin, so long as the flesh had not been obtained by murder. That philosophy of saving lives by any means short of murder may have been the root of the other point in which humans and Durangos disagreed. Humans restricted the term cannibalism to consumption as food. Durangos used it by any means of incorporating the flesh of another into one's own body. Such was the revulsion that the Durangos felt at the humans' willingness to transplant entire organs, and such was many humans' horror at the idea of letting someone die rather than accepting a simple blood donation, that the two species nearly went to war at third contact. But the initial skirmishes revealed enough firepower to make it clear that this was a war neither side could afford to win, let alone lose. So they eventually compromised on mutual avoidance. The visa applications for a human visiting Durangan space included questions about whether you'd ever had a blood transfusion or tissue graft. Durangos who needed to travel through human territories underwent extensive cleaning rituals before and after, and would often suicide on completion of their business if at any point during the trip they had required medical care for they transgressed their skin. The random DNA testing apparently had something to do with espionage amongst the various Durangan nation-states. It was bad luck that a human had been caught out by it. Sex in your species is determined by the chromosomes, is it not? Durangan prosecutor flicked his tongue out in an attempt to taste the defense's reactions through the heavy perfume that suffused the courtroom. The artificial scent served in practice the same purpose as Justice Blindfold did in the symbol. XY for male, XX for female, correct? This is correct, the human defense attorney conceded. As this trial was occurring in one of the smaller Durangan nations, the consulate he was attached to provided services for an eclectic mix of human nations, some of whom wouldn't be caught dead conducting joint operations back on Earth. So Y chromosome in a female human body must have come from someone else, the prosecutor concluded triumphantly. This is also true, the defense attorney conceded, seeming not nearly as reluctant as he should have been. The prosecution rests. The chief judge of the tribunal acknowledged the conclusion and indicated that it was the defense's turn. The defense attorney turned to his client. Mrs. Weiscourt, have you ever been pregnant? Yes, the human woman answered. Was the child male or female? I've had 3 boys and 2 girls, plus one that we never did determine whether it was miscarriage or a false pregnancy. Mrs. Weiscourt's voice wavered a little on the last point. At times, it seemed to her that the uncertainty must be worse than knowing if you had lost a child. The Durangos in the room were all flicking their tongues in attention, both fascinated by this glimpse into the nuances of oviparous reproduction, and also wondering where this line of questioning could possibly be heading. The defense attorney turned towards the judge. "Gentlemen, our species is not viviparous, but also placental. The placenta is a temporary organ composed of both fetal and maternal tissue that facilitates the delivery of nutrients and removal of waste from the baby's bloodstream. For a long time, it was believed that only chemicals crossed the placenta barrier: nutrients, waste products, signaling hormones, and the like. Eventually, however, we learned that there was cellular transfer occurring as well. The baby receives a cadre of fully trained immune cells from the mother. The mother receives an infusion of fetal stem cells from the baby. Had it been a room full of humans that hyper-focused, you could have heard a pin drop on a carpeted floor. Instead, the two humans detected an audible susurration from the rapidity of the Durango's tongue flicks alone. The defensive attorney waited until the Durangos began showing signs of slightly less undivided attention, and then said softly, "Gentlemen, I submit to you that it is not reasonable to include a process that is wholly natural and wholly involuntary within the scope of this criminal charge." Would further argument be needed to persuade them, or would it only irritate? Given that the prosecutor's entire case had been shorter than a typical human courtroom's introductory remarks, it seemed likely that the local culture placed an even higher value on brevity than the defense attorney had been led to expect. "The defense rests." The three judges didn't even bother withdrawing to confer, just used the judicial hand count. "Is the biology plausible? Prosecutor's job is to prove it isn't. Assent, he should have done more research. Not guilty by reason of insufficient evidence," the chief of the tribunal proclaimed. The verdict wasn't the vindication that either human would have preferred, but it got the job done. Outside the courtroom, the Durangan prosecutor stormed up to the human defense attorney. "If you lied about it being natural, I'll see every last one of your species ambassadors expelled from all of our nations." "The information is public access," the human said. "It was just pretty far down on the priority list. Microchimerism is just an odd bit of trivia, under normal circumstances. Not something that we'd expect to become relevant." "Not relevant," the Dungaroo cried out incredulously. "The only way to end up with someone else's DNA..." "The only way that you knew of," the human interrupted. "Assuming that one is in possession of all of the facts, it is most unwise, especially where biology is concerned. Every time we think we're finally getting a handle on how much we don't know, we stumble into a whole new layer of complexity." "Speaking of which," the human continued, "I know yours is an egg-laying species, but is fertilization internal or external?" "Internal. Why?" the Dungaroo asked cautiously. "We can't be certain, but there's always the possibility of a miscarriage before the mother ever knew that she was pregnant. But there are indications that it may be possible for the man's DNA to get incorporated into a woman's body, even in cases where no child was conceived." The human took advantage of the Dungaroo being frozen in horror to turn and walk away quickly, raced for a stream of curses or physical assault that never came. The other Durangos in the building gave the prosecutor a wide berth. They didn't even need to stick their tongues out to taste the scent of horror shock pouring from him, and it was common knowledge that the Durango who was startled out of horror paralysis might turn permanently homicidal. He needed to be allowed to work through at his own pace. Which is worse, that it might be true, or that, if it is true, I may be responsible for a number of false convictions. The prosecutor didn't know how long it had taken for his thoughts to regain coherency. He knew he still wasn't ready to move. And not I alone. "You can't prosecute a bloodstain for perjury," he recalled the line from the televised human debate with a shudder and added silently, "or a DNA sample. He thought those human cultures that shunned the death penalty to be hopelessly naive and dangerously squeamish. For they might have a point about the need for an even stricter standard of evidence in capital cases. Never base a capital conviction on forensic evidence alone, the prosecutor whispered as he roused to the building gone dark and mostly empty for the night. Assuming, of course, that the human's microchimerism hypothesis is correct. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.